Mike Memoli reports Biden has told Democratic figures recently that he's up to 90% likely to run and that he speaks regularly with former President Obama about a potential 2020 bid. But the one potential roadblock that could exist for Biden is the matter of family, and specifically the attacks the former VP will likely endure, or at least the former VP's family would likely endure from President Trump and his allies. Joining me now is our man in Biden world, NBC News national political reporter
Mike
Memoli. Mike, Biden wants to run for president.
He does. He wants to be president.
We know this.
Yeah.
Hunter Biden. That seems to be, I want to put up a statement that he gave to Vanity Fair a couple weeks ago. It seems that this is the 10% if he's at 90.
100%.
The priority has always been clear for my dad, as it is now for me. Never run from a struggle. He loves me, and he loves the American people far too much to let any form of adversity stand in the way of service. I got to think the Hunter thing cuts every way for the vice president.
Chuck, the thing has been interesting. I've been having the 2020 conversation with Biden land for, 2 years now, if not longer than that. And the people who are closest to the family tend to be the ones that are most bearish about the likelihood of Joe Biden running. And it's because they know most about the situation involving Hunter. He had a difficult divorce. There were a lot of issues with substance abuse raised and how he spent his money, his family's money. And as I've talked to people who are talking to Biden, that's one of the things that keeps coming up, that he's worried about the effect on Hunter, and also what happens when Donald Trump, who we saw it in 2016, what did he say about Ted Cruz? What did he say about Jeb Bush and their families? Nothing is sacred to him. And so the other issue is Biden's family is going to be an issue whether or not the president brings it up. Jill Biden has a book coming out in just 2 months, which is promising to be about the difficult journey the family has been on. Biden was still doing himself book events about the death of his son, Beau, the Promise Me Dad book recently. So this is going to be an issue no matter what. Part of the question is it better for Hunter Biden if Joe Biden runs or doesn't run? Because as you saw in that statement, Hunter Biden doesn't want to be the reason why he doesn't run.
I mean, it seems as if it's I just empathize with the vice president as a father.
100%.
It seems as if he now can fear that he might hurt his son either, whatever he does.
What I've been told by people close to the family is that this is a family that rallies around each other in a fight, and so perhaps the best thing for Hunter is to be engaged in this fight, to have the support and love. What I quote Chris Coons, obviously he holds Joe Biden's Senate seat. They met 2 weeks ago. His advice to the vice president is do not engage in that. When they're attacking your son, when they're attacking you and your honor, let us be there. Your winning strategy for becoming president, for winning the nomination, is being positive, for setting that big vision. Let us fight the fight for it.
By the way, it's astounding that it's just a given that the assumption is, of course, President Trump will make this an issue. And of course, it won't backlash on him. Why do we think it won't backlash on the president if he does go really low blow?
One thing I'll be curious to see, well, one, we're all just desensitized to everything he does. Yeah. The other thing is we've seen it already. I looked up every Trump tweet that mentions Biden. The one that we saw last year talks about him being both physically and mentally weak. So his strategy for bringing up the family might be actually to target Joe, suggesting that his own emotional state is fragile. That's a charge that could be seen as projection, of course. But that's, and of course he talked to, I think you were there for the anchors. He sees perhaps Joe Biden as the biggest target.
Very quickly, as President Obama at times looks like he's sending a message to the vice president, it's time for a new generation. He talks about, what is this? Does the president want him to run or not?
There's a lot of difficult feelings in part about what happened in 2016. I think one thing that was clear in Joe Biden's own book is disappointment that the president wasn't more for him in running in 2016. What I was told is that the president is trying to be helpful for him. He wants to be supportive. What's curious is I don't necessarily think there's going to be an ask on Biden's part for an endorsement for fear of what the answer might be. And clearly, I think there's a vision for how they can both maintain their stature as elder statesmen, in Biden's case especially, to help shape the field in the conversation without running.
Very interesting there. Anybody scare him in this field yet?
He's close with Kamala Harris, in part because of Beau. And interesting, he concedes Bernie Sanders is not my brand of Democrat, as he put it to me this week, but there's no debating how he has changed the conversation in the party.
Very interesting. Mike Memoli. Boy, for your sake, I hope Biden runs, because you've been on this beat for quite some time.
It's been fun.
Thanks very much. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.